Oh, thank you. Um, this is actually a joint from myself and Christine Bishop, who is on holiday at the moment in an area with rather unreliable internet. And so I'm going to talk about some general things that are of concern with relationship to the hummingbird diet and pesticides. And also because pollinator gardens are going to obviously be a big conversation this week. Some recent data that Christine has that should bring up some concerns that should be discussed. So I'll talk about hello. Okay, no. So I'm going to talk about why nestlings need aquatic emergent invertebrates and how pesticides in agriculture can create a problem there. And then I'll talk about Christine's new bit of data. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you. Um, I love this comment by Clark and Hobson. Not all insects are created equal. And it's because pond scum is incredibly important for vertebrate development. Uh, Who knew? So it's actually the aquatic algae, the diatoms, that make polyunsaturated fatty acids. You might know them as omega-3 fatty acids. And these are necessary for vertebrate development and immune and neurological function. And the way they get to the vertebrates is they move up the food chain. Next slide, please. So when we think about productivity, we think about nestlings. And so I wanted to remind people that nestlings are made of mashed insects. So way back when we did a diet study, and once the nestlings had fledged, we went around and collected pellets that decorated the nest area. And when we looked at the invertebrates in those pellets, they were mostly insects. And when we looked at what insects, they were mostly Diptera. And when we looked at what Diptera, they were mostly aquatic emergent Diptera. Next slide, please. So what this means is that the places that provide aquatic emergent diptera are going to be really important for productivity. So that's talking wetlands. And these can be compromised by drainage, by pollution, and by pesticides. So something like BTI that we use for mosquito management is a real broad swath pesticide against all the diptera. But I'm going to speak specifically about the agricultural pesticides. So if we look at the picture I have here, this is a restored wetland in the Fraser Valley, which really are a major valley in British Columbia. Next slide, please. Next, yeah, thank you. So if you look at this valley, it's actually like 100 kilometers long. And way back when, this was all wetland, like we saw before. But like many coastal, low-lying areas, it's been converted to urban development and intensive agriculture. And so when I try and find a hummingbird in the intensive agriculture areas, it's nigh on impossible. Next slide, please. And when you look at it, it's this intensive blueberry agriculture, which they've drained the wetland and they've used intensively pesticides. So that brought us to looking at what pesticides. Next slide, please. The pesticides that we looked at were the systemic pesticides. And these are delivered either in seed treatments, in foliar sprays, tree injections, and in soil drenching. And they work by actually being within the actual plant itself. So an insect is exposed to it by chewing on the foliage, on the roots, sucking the sap, or drinking the nectar. And the thing we have to remember is that most of that insecticide has never actually entered the plant. If we think about the seed treatments, only 2 to 20% of that pesticide enters the plant. The rest has entered the soil, the aquatic system, it's moving in dust. And this means when we apply these pesticides, much of it is going into the environment. And the pesticides are quite persistent. They have synergists along with them that slow their breakdown. They're also very water soluble. And so they move out quite far into the aquatic environment and into the soil around. So they are escaping the areas where they're being applied quite easily. Now, these systemic insecticides as a group are neurotoxic. So they are going to affect the mobility. So if they don't actually kill the insect, they tend to make them less mobile because they're working on the nerves. So this makes them easy to catch. And so they enter wildlife a lot because the sublethally contaminated insects can enter the system. Next slide, please. So when we look at orchards, for example, they're using these large sprayers. And these blast sprayers aren't very specific to that one plant. You can imagine that there's quite a lot of drift and escapement from the actual farm area. Next slide, please. So what we see is these effects travel through the ecosystem, and we see it a lot in insectivores. So for example, the insect-eating birds, we can see two types of toxicity. We see the direct toxicity. Something like acute poisoning often is seen with seed eaters because they get a large amount all at once. And a single seed can actually be toxic. Whereas the ones that are eating sublethally, chronically contaminated insects, they'll have sublethal exposure levels, but those can impact energetics, they can impact reproduction and longevity. The other effect that can happen is the indirect effect because there is a loss of insects because of these compounds are acutely toxic to aquatic and soil invertebrates. And so there just isn't any food around. So if we think of why I can't find any hummingbirds nesting in the Fraser Valley around agriculture, it's no real surprise. Two things. One, it might be hard to find food itself. But if we think of a baby hummingbird as being basically made of mashed insects, they could be being exposed to very high levels of contaminant. Next slide, please. So we can certainly see these contaminants in the cloacal fluid, especially near intense agriculture. Blueberries was the specific agriculture we were looking at. And when you have a hummingbird, which drinks a lot of nectar, it releases a lot of cloacal fluid, which you can then test, and we can find all the usual suspects, really. The neonicotinoids, the synergists, and we can find the butanoids. So that's another systemic type. And these are at biologically real concentrations. These are going to have real effects, sublethal effects, but real effects on mobility and energy and so on. If this was a pond, if this cloacal fluid was a pond, sensitive inverts would keel over and die. But other inverts would just be chronically sublethally contaminated but also maybe have some mobility issues. Next slide, please. So between 2015 and 2025, we not only looked at cloacal fluid throughout the province and in Saskatchewan as well, but Christine expanded this work to look at in BC, and primarily the Fraser Valley, at other areas where these contaminants could be found. She looked at honeybees, their nectar and their honey. She looked at wild bees, at wildflowers, at nursery flowers, at sediment and in aquatic systems. And basically, contamination was up to a kilometer away from commercial uh, um, enterprises. So really, there's widespread escapement from the agricultural systems. Next slide, please. So just to give you some idea of these other species, for example, in honeybees, we found the typical neonic imidacloprid. We found biologically relevant levels in the nectar and the honey. In the butanolide that they brought in recently as the safer version, but they just use about 10 times more, flupyridifuron. Again, it was found at most sites. When wildflowers were looked at, they were contaminated with both of these as well, and also garden flowers. So garden flowers not necessarily from garden centers. Next slide, please. So this led Christine to really think a lot more about how what we're buying from garden centers could be compromising the pollinator gardens. And that was the reason we're bringing this forward for this meeting, because when we're thinking about encouraging pollinators gardens, there's some things we have to think about with respect to source and recommendations. So just to reiterate, she was looking at two types of systemic insecticide, the neonicotinoids and the butanolides. But basically, they're all systemic. They all are neurotoxic. Next slide, please. So in 2018, as part of those earlier studies, Christina happened to sample some petunias and a marigold. And I can hear you saying, well, hummingbirds aren't going to those. But they had highish levels of these insecticides. And what that brought home is that the soil that these plants are in is going to be going in our gardens, is going to be going into our planters. And that because there are synergists working with these pesticides instead of breaking down quickly, you can be looking at half-lives of 3 to 14 years. So they're very aquatically mobile and they could be moving out. So how are we disposing of this soil? Are we putting it in compost? Where is it going? And so that then led to a bit more thinking about it, which is these next few little results that we're going to show. The next slide, please. So Christine basically went around some nurseries and purchased various flowers advertised as pollinator flowers and analyzed 3 to 4 flower heads per plant. And what is important to remember is the application rates in nurseries is often much higher than it is out in the crop fields. So what did she get? Next slide, please. So echinacea, sunflowers, sedums, she was finding all of the usual suspects and biologically relevant amounts. Now, this is just a sample of four types. If you can go to the next slide, the scary one, especially for me, because I love petunias, was that the amount of pesticide in the petunias literally dwarfed the others. So, how we are considering the plants that we buy from your nurseries, what their source is, what that soil that they're in is, matters considerably. Next slide, please. This last slide was actually something she took from a suburban organic garden, and she sampled a lavender in 2020, and then she sampled it again in 2022. And she's still finding these pesticides. Now, it's an organic garden. There should be no sources of these. And yet it must have come in with the original plant, and synergists must be holding the breakdown so that these pesticides, being aquatically mobile, have moved out further and are continuing to contaminate the plants that we're using. So this is kind of a sad message, but it's just one that I think we should bear in mind when we're making recommendations. So my last slide is just a questions one, but I'd like to remind you of my key messages here. And is that we got to consider the plants that are sold or recommended for pollinators because they could have very high levels of systemics. Some of them will undoubtedly have synergists that make very long breakdown times. And that soil, quite apart from the plant itself, that soil is hugely contaminated. And when we dispose of it or where we put it matters a lot because of the aquatic mobility. And then when we're thinking about productivity, those juveniles need they just need a constant diet of these aquatic emergent diptera. And they could be getting huge levels if we are not careful in the control of what food sources we're giving them. So we need to look at that spread closely. The other thing I wanted to say, and it's just a brief caution, is just because we're not hearing about it doesn't mean it isn't present. The agricultural pesticide lobby is extremely powerful, and there have been many changes to reduce reporting, lobbying that reduces control and so on. And that, there's cutbacks that, there are budgetary constraints. But I know in Canada alone, this year, Environment Canada and Climate Change has stopped long-term monitoring of pesticide levels and the effects in a lot of their wildlands. So it's happening everywhere. And so not to forget this as a really key issue and remember that just because it's not appearing in the news, we could be missing information. Thank you. And any questions? And if people want actual lists of the papers or anything, I'm happy to just email me and I'll send them. But thank you very much.